English translation. 228th contact. Monday, 1st May 1989, 18:05 hours.
I see you have prepared some questions for me. I will gladly answer them, but afterwards I would like to discuss some private matters with you, which you should not tell anyone.
Of course. Are they private things on your part or mine?
It is purely private matters that concern you alone. They are really so private that you should not talk about them with anyone, by which I mean Earth humans. Of course, you can talk about them with any of us if you feel the need to do so. But now bring forward your questions.
I will keep that in mind. Thank you. But to my first question, I know from you that all animals, birds, fish, amphibians, and snakes, but also various small forms of life that belong to the areas of worms, beetles, and insects, etc., have a nervous system and are therefore also subject to pain. In the case of small and very small life forms, and also in the case of certain fish and other aquatic creatures, etc., the nervous system is sometimes so delicate that even a simple touch can be very painful. How can you define this sense of pain? I mean, can you compare it to that of human beings?
Depending on the life form, whether it is a very small life form, a small or a large life form, the sensation of pain is different. Small and very small life forms, always provided that they have a nervous system, feel pain in a finer form appropriate to them than is the case with larger life forms, in which the feeling of pain is naturally expressed in a stronger wise. The sensation of pain is classified according to the genus, species, and size of the life form, which also feels its sensation of pain according to its evolutionary state. So the higher the evolutionary level is, the higher is also the sensation of pain. In this sequence, the human being is characterized by the highest sensitivity to pain, as he or she is able to consciously perceive and judge pain through his or her conscious awareness, and also has a psyche that can be affected by pain of a psychological as well as physical nature. In human beings, there is the additional circumstance of the personal attitude towards pain, which means that pain of any kind can be endured well or degenerate into sniveling, depending on the individual attitude and view. After the human beings come the higher life forms, which have an instinct consciousness and thus also a psyche, through which they also perceive psychic and physical pain, which, as already explained, is expressed according to the size and state of evolution of the life form. Next come the life forms that have a pure drive consciousness and thus no psyche. These life forms perceive, again depending on their size or tininess, purely physical pain. The smaller the life form, the less the perception of pain. The larger and more evolutionary the life form, the greater the perception of pain.
We have an old saying, never torture an animal for a joke, because it feels the pain just like you do. However, according to what you said, I think that applies not only to animals, but also to all other life forms, such as birds, fish, amphibians, reptiles, various insects, and everything else that crawls and flies.
That is not quite correct, my friend, because various small and micro life forms and various insects have only extremely weak nervous systems, if any.
Nevertheless, one should not torture life forms, also not small and very small ones. This also includes insects. If they have to be killed, it should be quickly and painlessly. This should also apply to animals for slaughter, which are cruelly tortured, beaten, kicked, wounded, and tortured during transport to the slaughterhouses, and then in the slaughterhouses themselves. This is in addition to the fact that the poor creatures feel that they are being put to death. The cruelest and most primitive method of killing animals is probably slaughter. while the equally cruel rule for fish is that they have to die gasping for oxygen because they are simply thrown out into the dry, or they are slit open alive. Lobsters and crabs are thrown alive into boiling water. Small monkeys are clamped alive into special feeding tables in such a way that only the head barely protrudes from the middle of the table, with the feeders then smashing the skull of the fear-stricken primate with several blows of a small hammer in order to open it and eat the brain. Sharks are brutally thrown back into the sea when their dorsal fins have been cut off while they are still alive. Young seals are beaten to death with clubs for the sake of their fur. Whales are shot with harpoons fitted with detonators, the charges of which then explode in their bodies. Horses are beaten to death with hammers. Dogs and cats are hung alive by the neck and slit open at the stomach, etc., etc. There is probably no other life form in the entire universe than the human beings who are so barbaric, conscienceless, pitiless, callous, murderous, and Oscar-ardent, to have gotten very badly out of control of the good human nature.
With which, unfortunately, you meet the truth.
Unfortunately, yes.
But there was another question that was asked of me that I could not answer. It concerns the planet Neptune, or rather its moons.
As far as I know, our astronomers know that the planet has 2 moons, Nereid on the one hand, and Triton on the other. When I was allowed to look at all the Soel planets and their moons up close during my great journey through Ptah's kindness, it was explained to me that Triton was the coldest structure among all the planets and moons in the Soel system. Later Sim-Yase took me back to the moon Triton again, where I could observe an interesting phenomenon. Namely that, like from volcanoes, some kind of vapors, real steam fountains, escape from funnels on the moon's surface and then evaporated at a higher altitude. Now I no longer know what Sim-Yase explained these vapors to be. That is one thing. On the other hand, I have found that the planet Neptune has not only 2 moons, but several of them. If I remember correctly, I counted their 8 larger ones, though there were also some small formations curving around.
The moons are correct, so there is nothing more to be said. With regard to the vapors, it is to be said that this is evaporating nitrogen ice, which freezes out during the winter period and then evaporates again after the Triton winter due to the radiation of the sun.
So the sun with its radiation has quite a force even at this great distance. Neptune is about 30 times as far away from the sun as the Earth. It also has about 4 times the equatorial diameter of the Earth, so about 50,000 kilometers, and about 16 or 17 times the mass of the Earth. As far as I know, it rotates around its own axis about every 16 hours. But still to the planet Neptune itself. I admired the large dark spot of a gigantic cyclone or even several of them, as is also the case with Saturn. I also found Neptune's ring system magnificent. My question now is whether you can tell me how large the cyclone storm area on Neptune is.
Earth would just fit into that area.
So the diameter is more than 12,000 kilometers.
That is of correctness.
Good. Then the next question. Do you actually know the context of why Ptah and Sim-Yase and you are the leaders in terms of the mission that I have to accomplish?
Your question strikes me as strange.
And may I ask why? And will you answer my question or not?
Why do you ask? Your question sounds strange to my ears with an undertone, just as if you were testing me to see if I knew more than you did.
You also notice everything, my friend. Yes, I want to know what you know about the connections. Perhaps I also actually know some things.
Sim-Yase, and I, as well as Ptah and his father Sfath, and also my father, each belong to a line of descent on the father's side, which goes back to Henoch and Nokodemion and their sons. It was these sons who committed themselves to the mission of instructing all the lineages descended from Nokodemion and Henoch in hereditary succession in the teaching of the Spirit. aka creation energy teaching, and to preserve all the knowledge in this regard, which has been continuously compiled and recorded up to the present time and now comprises more than 77 million OM canons. In order to be able to fulfill this mission on other worlds, where old spirit forms from the Henok, that is to say Nokademion lineage, have reincarnated because earlier human beings from the said lineage have faded away there. As they did on Earth, the worlds concerned have since time immemorial always chosen special human beings who were taught by our ancestors and primordial ancestors in the same manner as we do. And since you are that human being on the Earth who corresponds to our requirements, we have naturally considered your personality for the mission of teaching, and as a herald of the teaching of the Spirit, creation energy teaching. Although there are various uncertainties regarding the origin of your spirit form, it is to be assumed that we will also finally solve this riddle. We have our suspicions, which we are investigating, and which we will probably soon clarify once and for all. We also suspect that you could tell us more about the origin of your spirit form than you are telling us. That is probably why there is such a strange undertone to your question, as if you wanted to hear how much I know about it.
It will probably be as you say. But without secrecy, Svath was fully oriented about everything, because besides Ta, Svath embodied the last fully knowing person in relation to all things. However, he had to fathom the secret himself, because he also received only partial information from his father. The same applied to his father, and thus to Svath's grandfather, etc., all the way back to Henok, that is to say Nokademion. The process of receiving information was such that each descendant, female and male, was only given access to information up to a certain point, the basic information. Everything else then had to be learned and fathomed independently through one's own learning and hard efforts, so that evolution was guaranteed. This is still the case today, so you and Ta and Simyase have to go the same way, which also applies to me. This also applies to Earth humans, for if all knowledge were simply thrown to them like food and eaten by them thoughtlessly and without processing, then it would not bring any actual success, but only a certain school knowledge, while the rest would be excreted again, undigested as excrement. In other words, it would all be forgotten, undigested, and would therefore be completely useless. But if a certain small amount of material is presented, with which thorough further work can be done and progressive success achieved, then the knowledge remains in solid form and can be reworked and expanded into wisdom at any time.
Indeed, I always admire your insights and knowledge. Yes, it is of correctness what you say. But you are still hiding something from me, my friend.
You are right, dear friend. But if you remember, about 10 years ago, I gave Ta a photograph that I received anonymously from someone. It was probably in the month of November or December of the year 1978 or 1979, later NB. 117th contact of Wednesday, 29th November 1978, 1512 HRs, from Billy Dower to Ptah, sentences 98 to 118. If you get to the bottom of the matter of the photograph and investigate everything, you will undoubtedly unravel the mystery. Actually, you should have noticed it already at that time, but for some reason, so I assume, despite the importance of the photo, you probably did not investigate it, and also did not recognize its importance. But I am not allowed to say more about what I have explained. I have given the reason for this. It may be that this seems a little strange to you, because I am an earthling whom you have taught and who was therefore your pupil, and will also remain so in many things. But as I still have much to learn, that is also incumbent on you. Also Simya, Se, and Ptah, even though he is already an Ishwish. But you, Ptah and Simya, Se, you will find out the secret. And when you are so far, when you have reached the degree of evolution of Shrut, Then, after all, the Schrute level is open to you, from which you will receive all the necessary information and revelations that are important for you.
We have very well dealt with the picture, but obviously we did not do so in the wise that would have been necessary. A deeper importance of the image has escaped us. But we will now try to find out. Although in the last few years I had come to the conclusion that I had learned a lot about you, you are now posing me new riddles that I can no longer solve so easily. And I also wonder about that. How do you know the secret of the evolutionary state of Schrute? And how is it that you know about the revelatory tradition? You suddenly become very mysterious to me again.
Svath has been a very good teacher to me.
But he was not allowed to tell you anything about it, because this is part of the strictest secret teaching. His actions are not to be understood.
Calm down, my son, and do not do Svath an injustice. He has told me nothing of this.
Besides,
You have just revealed to me that you, probably also Ta and Simya Se, have evolved into the first level of the Schrute state. Otherwise, you would have no knowledge of this level of evolution and of the revelatory lore from the memory block of the spirit teaching, creation energy teaching.
Now I understand even less. You are not trying to say,
Yes, my friend, exactly that. Do not look at me like that. I am not a miraculous animal.
but
Just take it for what it is.
how?
Just crammed and learned, crammed again and learned again, and again and again.
Unbelievable. But now a lot of things are starting to become clear to me. It is
Why are you interrupting yourself?
It is unbelievable, I was going to say. And all this you have kept from us until now. Ta will be very surprised when I break the news to him. Now I am all the more interested in the real secret that surrounds you.
If there is such a thing, you will soon have solved it now. But now let us talk about something else. I still have some questions. At an earlier time we once talked about the fact. Later note, 100th contact, Friday, 6.1. 1978, Quetzal, sentences 81 to 84, that there are still many undiscovered food substances on Earth that are very valuable for human beings, but only a few of them are known. Moreover, you said at that time, Earth humans would avoid them for inexplicable reasons, that is to say, for incomprehensible reasons of disgust. At a later time you made a further statement about this, which unfortunately was not recorded in a contact report. You spoke of the said food substances existing in the seas, rivers, and lakes. Are they small and micro-life forms?
On the one hand, yes, in the form of plant and creature plankton. On the whole, these are very small living beings floating in the water, which do not move by themselves, but are moved by the timeless weak or strong waves of the waters. Furthermore, however, there are also food substances in the form of all kinds of algae, etc., which human beings could make use of if only they would make an effort or not be disgusted by them. The aforementioned products or foodstuffs, plankton and algae, are diverse and also not only filling, but also health-preserving and health-promoting, because they contain many vital substances such as various acids, vitamins, as well as trace elements and minerals. Such foods are found both in the salty seas and in fresh waters, that is to say in streams, rivers, creeks, and lakes.
NB Billy, May 2003. The foodstuffs mentioned from seas and fresh waters are on the one hand, as explained by Quetzal, vegetable and living plankton, but on the other hand also algae and other water plants of various kinds. However, it is also predominantly a freshwater alga, namely a genus of algae called Spirulina platensis, a blue-green microalga, general name blue-green alga, whose spirally wound cell filaments, hence spirulina, have a thickness of approx. 0.3. The genus of blue-green algae comprises about 1,400 species that are distributed all over the Earth, although, as explained, they occur predominantly in fresh water and much less in seawater. Originally, the species of blue-green algae grew in tropical and clean as well as mineral-rich waters of Asia, Africa, and South America, whereby they were particularly widespread in lakes. The microalgae obtain their essential nutrients from sunlight, water, and heat. Through photosynthesis, at 40 to 50 degrees Celsius, it binds minerals, trace elements and vitamins that are present in the soil, as well as in the air and water, and transforms them into a complex and natural and very valuable food. Spirulina platensis has a very thin cell membrane and thus no cell wall made of indigestible cellulose, as is the case with other microalgae and plants. This thin cell membrane ensures that the spirulina algae food is optimally broken down in the gastrointestinal tract, and that the human being's organism can absorb the very valuable substances of the blue-green algae particularly well. If we look at the ingredients of spirulina platensis in percentages, we find 60% proteins, 14% carbohydrates, 8.6% ash, 6.4% crude fiber, and 6% fats. Spirulina platensis also contains a number of essential and non-essential amino acids, essential fatty acids, plant pigments, vitamins, minerals, and nucleic acids. Spirulina platensis has been known in various countries since about the middle of the 20th century, and is also in use as a food, especially in Japan. But a triumphal march around the world and to the whole of human beings has unfortunately not yet appeared until the beginning of the third millennium, although millions of human beings are already using spirulina products. Many human beings are unfortunately disgusted by algae products. However, this is usually only because they are largely unknown in the human food chain. In America and Europe, spirulina is mainly used in initiated circles as a food supplement, which is why it is only available in this form and not as an actual food. In-depth information about spirulina platensis and the great value of this microalga can be found in the very insightful book by Frank Felter, Spirulina, Essen Sie Leben, ISBN 264840, who has been involved in orthomolecular medicine for many years.
Thank you. So certain algae and other aquatic plants are not only full substitutes for all vegetables, but in addition they are much more valuable than any vegetable grown on Earth, if I understood your words correctly.
That is of correctness.
You once said, if I remember correctly, that the food, alcohol, medicines and drugs that human beings consume change their genes, just as they are also changed by the attitude of consciousness and the state of the psyche, and by climatic influences, such as cold and heat, or by atmospheric changes in chemical composition, and so on. I explained this to one of our doctors, who said that this could not be the case, because genes would only change and develop differently, but not in the form as I said.
The doctor is wrong because your explanation was of correctness.
I am reassured by that. But what about the thoughts, the feelings, and the psyche? You also said that the genes play a certain role.
That is of correctness. First of all, feelings arise from thoughts, and from these feelings the state of the psyche is formed. Damage to consciousness and psyche damage are fundamentally based on polygenetic influences and are multifunctional, which means that they are caused simultaneously by genes and by external factors. However, genetic material is not solely responsible, but also viruses and traumas, technological noises, alcohol, medication, drugs, fears, and unjust or hysterical behavior of fellow human beings, etc. The genetic code, however, is not dictatorial, but flexible. Consequently, it does not determine the fate of human beings, because they truly do it themselves through their thoughts and feelings, as well as through their actions. The whole process is controlled by impulses and perceptions from within the human being, as well as by external factors and perceptions, etc. Just as the brain stands in relation to the body, so also the genes stand in such a relation to the cells. They are subject to a healthy flexibility and plasticity or malleability, and are created by a dynamic process. The malleability of the genes frees the human being from genetic determinism, and thus from a causal predetermination of all events or actions. Consequently, the human being is classified as free will. Unfortunately, this does not always apply to every human being, for sometimes the genetic inheritance takes on a life of its own and decides the fate of human beings without their will. However, this only applies in the case of evil. Severe diseases of neuropsychiatric form, which are directly inherited and then triggered by a single mutated hereditary trait, which also means that the hereditary disease can be passed on. In a very severe disease of this kind, the whole personality is gradually destroyed, and a fatal end is inevitable. If parents are afflicted with such a severe hereditary disease, even only one parent, then the disease is passed on to the offspring, whereby the risk for them to suffer from the hereditary disease is 50%.
Thank you for your elaboration. Then again, a question of a completely different subject. Our astronomical scientists continue to stubbornly claim that our universe is only just 8 to 15 billion, 8,000 to 15,000 years old. They have no idea that the visible universe is only one of 7 universe belts. They have no idea whatsoever about our material universe belt, in which we exist materially, while on the inside and outside of our visible material universe belt, there are 6 other and more subtle belts. Also, our scientists have no idea that the total universe is a double spiral and egg-shaped creation, etc. The total universe, with an age of about 46 trillion years, calculated from the Big Bang until today, is expanding until the time of 155.5 trillion, 155,500,000 years, only to collapse again through a contraction. During its expansion, the matter belt, or our visible universe, is constantly renewed by a seemingly endless process of change, and thus always remains young. The oldest matter that you have found is almost 40 billion 40,000 years old, while we here on Earth have not yet come into possession of any such matter, and therefore our scientists are also living in erroneous assumptions. Now, after my long speech, my question is when, after the creation of the matter belt or our visible material universe, the first celestial bodies were formed. In my opinion, this process should have happened very quickly.
This is unknown to us, and besides, your question cannot be answered in this wise either. You have to assume that the last great process of change and renewal of the material universe, that is to say, our visible material universe, took place approximately 17 billion 17,000 years ago. In the process, new stars formed again in the inner of the outer areas of the material universe belt, not in the outermost of the direct transformation area, at a distance of about 14 billion 14,000 light years from the SOL system, which began to radiate and shine after about 187 million years of the last great transformation process. And these stars will also be discovered by terrestrial astronomical scientists in the coming decades. Only they will, unfortunately, as so often before, draw the wrong conclusions from them again.
And how do these celestial bodies in the transformation belt come into being, if I may ask?
That does not fall under secrecy. The new matter that is created during the renewal or change condenses under the powerful universal force of gravity and forms the celestial bodies by compressing the mass, which then condense and develop their own heat-powerful life.
Easy to say, but surely a process that takes many millions of years. But that brings me to my next question. Is it possible to determine the mass of matter in our visible material universe if you completely exclude the other 6 belts?
It would be unscientific and arrogant to try to do this, because the entire expanse of our universe is so vast and involved in constant change that it is impossible to calculate exactly. Moreover, our universe, like any other, of course, consists not only of gross matter, but also of pure energies, one of which is black energy, as we call it, which is responsible for a certain form of anti-gravity in the material universe, and is estimated to account for 3/5 of all universal energies. Matter must also be seen in different forms. So, on the one hand, the visible and tangible matter, which is very small to be calculated with about 0.55, while on the other hand, still the dark matter is 1.55. But as I said, this information is only based on estimations and calculations, which, due to the constant change of the visible material universe, are not constant but extremely variable. To want to name exact results would therefore be nonsensical and arrogant and, moreover, ridiculous, because exact calculations cannot be made due to the constant change of the universe.
Then, I guess it would be fair to say that our material universe belt is actually dominated by black energy, right?
That is of correctness.
We know, after all, that the total universe does not expand forever, but only expands until the time of 155.5 trillion years, and then succumbs to contraction. During the expansion process of the entire universe, the visible material universe also becomes larger and larger, if I look at the whole thing correctly. And since this must be the case, there must also be different temperatures in our universe, because I assume that heat and cold must be generated by the constant change movement. Am I correct in my assumption?
That is of correctness. Although the temperature fluctuations are universe-wide and very minimal, they occur mainly in those parts of our material universe where the uninterrupted change through the outer, immaterial belts takes place. This is what we call the transitionless open change zone.
This transformation zone does produce a rushing sound, as Ptah taught me on the Great Journey. I was also allowed to hear it through the technical devices in the giant spacecraft. It was simply gigantic. Ptah explained to me that the Earthlings call this phenomenon cosmic background radiation, and assume that the Big Bang took place there in that zone, and that the universe also ended there.
Which does not correspond to correctness, as you know.
Of course, because that is where the actual total universe begins with its other 6 immeasurable belts. Ptah also said that the differences in temperature are actually very small and therefore only subject to tiny fluctuations caused by differences in density in all regions of our material universe.
You are a human being with a very remarkable memory. Your statement corresponds to correctness.
Ptah and you and Simya say, you have said that our Milky Way has about 570,570,000 suns with planets, but that in addition there are only about 7 million smaller and larger solar systems with planets on which higher life exists. Does that also include planetary satellites or moons?
Yes, because in certain solar systems with gigantic central stars, there are giant planets with enormous gravitational forces that are themselves too large to support higher life, while their moons are very capable of doing so. But according to your understanding, these life-bearing entities are not called moons, but planets.
Probably because they are actual planets of a mother planet, right?
That is of correctness.
And the 7 million solar systems with planets in our galaxy where higher life exists, are they collectively just human civilizations?
No. The universe with all its galaxies is very sparsely populated with human life forms, which also includes all space and time-shifted dimensions, or all existing space-time structures. Many planets and moons support only very low-level, microorganic life or only life forms such as animals, birds, fish, bugs, and insects, etc., which have nothing to do with higher life.
Then I misunderstood a few things, because I was under the impression that you always talked about the life forms being only human beings.
Then you were mistaken in assuming that the 7 million or so solar systems with their planets could only be equated with human civilizations. Maybe you really have
Misunderstood something.
That is what I was going to say. Actual cohesive advanced human civilizations are known to us in this galaxy only 2.63 million, with 1.141 billion 1,141,000 from other galaxies known to us to add to that. Actual low-evolved civilizations in this galaxy, which you call the Milky Way, are known to us at 1.04 million. Overall, universally in your material space-time structure, our scientists estimate that there should be about 6 to 7 trillion, 6,000, 1,000 to 7,000 actual human civilizations of high and low form.
What do you mean by actual cohesive human civilizations?
By this is meant the coherence of the totality of progress created by science and technology, which also includes developed and improved medical, social, and material living conditions, and so on.
There are quite clever ones on Earth who claim that the Sol system comprises 12 planets, whereby the Sun and the Earth's moon are also counted as planets. And since so far only the 9 planets Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are known, that is to say 9. Another planet with the name Nibiru, and other names like Anus, Planet X, Marduk, Phaeton, Olam, Vulcan, and Persephone, etc. are added. Thus, together with the Sun, the Earth, Moon, and Nibiru, the silly theses of 12 Sol planets are to be proved. On Nibiru, the people of the Anunnaki are said to have lived, and the Earth humans are said to have received all kinds of extraterrestrial help from them. The planet Nibiru, so it is claimed today, is said to have been captured by our solar system as a young wandering planet about 4,004,000,000 years ago, which, always according to this claim, is then said to have developed. Nibiru is said to have penetrated the inner system and to have caused certain changes in the inner planets and moons before it disappeared again, to then be placed in an orbital period of 3,600 years. And contrary to what corresponds to the reality, that the Earth was formed from scratch by space matter, by gases, planetoids, etc., and that the Earth's moon was captured by the Earth as a satellite from your space-time structure, it is claimed that the Earth was part of a planet Tiamat, and that our moon was once the largest of the Tiamat. The last passage through the Sol system of the planet Nibiru is said to have been about 160 years before Emmanuel's birth. Now, what is to be made of all this?
These stories are known to me because I have studied various ancient earthly writings, among others also many cuneiform tablets. Therefore, I know that already the human beings in Acadia, Babylon, and in Sumer knew the planets of the Sol system, etc. However, what emerges from ancient writings concerning the Anunnaki and the planet Nibiru is based on mythological facts as well as on faith, misdirection, and misconceptions. The Anunnaki beings were a pure imagination of the Earth humans, who imaginatively and believingly constructed the Anunnaki people of the planet Nibiru from it. when the gigantic celestial structure appeared, which in reality was not an actual planet, but an unusually large comet, which has an actual orbital period around the Sol system of about 3,600 years. The Anunnaki people of Nibiru therefore only appeared mythologically in the imagination of ancient Earth humans. But in reality, they never existed, because the comet is not capable of supporting human life. Moreover, it must be said that the name Phaeton is completely misused. For Phaeton was the planet that was destroyed by its inhabitants, namely Melona, which broke into thousands of pieces and today forms the asteroid belt. With regard to the planet Melona, that is to say Phaeton, it is also falsely claimed that it was the planet from which the Earth and its moon sprang. Tiamat is an old Earth language term for the planet Phaeton, that is to say Melona, which was destroyed by human irrationality. All that remains to be said is that beyond the sun, a large planet orbits the star at great speed, and can therefore never be seen from Earth. This is an uninhabited planet to which we have given the name Cathine, but which will drift out of the Solar system in the coming time. However, this is not the comet mentioned. Beyond Pluto's orbit, there are also two different belts of comets and wandering planets, many of which enter the inner solar system at regular, periodic, and also sporadic intervals. In the process, sporadic diverse ones can also endanger the Sol planets, which in larger time intervals also repeatedly leads to comets actually crashing down on planets.
Can you explain a bit more about that, please?
The first belt, a zone, is measured from the Sun to more than 150,000 astronomical units away. One astronomical unit corresponds to the average distance from the Sun to the Earth, that is to say, 149,197,870 kilometers. In earlier times, when the pyramids of Giza were built, this distance was 152.5 million kilometers, a figure that is also of enormous importance in relation to the calculation of the total universal 280 elements. 150,000 astronomical units correspond to about 4,000 times the distance from the Sun to the planet Pluto, which is actually the last planet in the solar system known to human beings. All other formations outside Pluto's orbit already belong to the zone of the first belt.
Excuse me, but what is it about the 10th planet that is supposed to be floating around out there? You guys have always talked about such a 10th and further planet.
Apart from smaller planets far outside Pluto's orbit, this is the Earth-sized planet Cathain, which orbits the Sun at great speed and at a great distance, but which will drift away more and more in the coming years and escape into space. Its orbital period around the Sun is so great that seen from Earth, it remains steadily hidden behind the Sun. But listen further. In the aforementioned first zone of the first belt, far outside Pluto's orbit, there are tiny, small, medium, large and largest objects estimated to number about 1.3,1,300,000, of which, again estimated, about 130,130,000 comet nuclei must be taken into account. Furthermore, there is a second zone, that is to say, a second belt, much further outside the first belt, which, like the first one, runs in a ring around the solar system. In this belt, too, there are innumerable objects of all sizes, and so, of course, also very numerous comet nuclei. As in the first, there are also very large objects in the second, up to the size of the Earth or even larger. Due to the great distance from the Sun and the absence of light in dark space, the objects can hardly be seen from Earth, if at all, even with good telescopes. The two belts, which can also be called rings, are the remains of that gigantic primordial cloud of gases, particles and objects, etc., from which the solar system with all its planets ultimately formed more than 5,500,000 years ago. However, the primordial substances of the cloud did not form at the time mentioned, but more than 46,046,000 years ago, and then condensed into their final form in the course of time, providing the material for the solar system more than 5,500,000 years ago. Objects drift off the two aforementioned belts from time to time, also comet nuclei that enter the inner Sol system. In other words, when occasionally a fixed star comes into a certain astronomical proximity, this causes individual comet nuclei from the many billions of smallest, small, medium, large, and largest objects to break away from the association of the two zones and take up an orbit into the inner solar system. Many of the comets, like the one we have spoken of as Nibiru, after their approach to the Sun and to their planets, including the Earth, move back to their outermost regions of origin outside the inner solar system, or they take up an inner system orbit so that they remain in the direct solar system as systemic comets and constantly follow their orbits. Many that return to the zones of the outermost two belts remain there for a very long time before returning. Thus, the length of stay in the belts can be centuries, millennia, tens of thousands or even hundreds of millions of years before they return to the interior of the solar system on their orbits, if they have been or are forced into a recurrent orbit by the Sun and its planets. Others again are pulled under the spell of planets by their moons or by the Sun and come crashing down on them, shattering.
Thank you for your comments. I would also like to say something about that, though, if you permit.
Just speak. You will also know a few things regarding comets, I suppose.
Yes, but please correct me if I say something wrong. So, comets are discovered practically every year, but most of them are only visible with binoculars or telescopes, but not with the naked eye. Comets are also called hair stars or tail stars, and occasionally they appear in the sky, offering a truly fantastic spectacle, and can also be observed for a long time in the firmament. From time immemorial, tail stars have been regarded as spectacular and sensational celestial phenomena, and the mere sight of them in the day or night sky has caused a tremendous stir and often even panic. If we look at comets from antiquity, we see that they were not yet regarded as celestial bodies, for these drifting phenomena were attributed to the atmosphere as a similar phenomenon to lightning and clouds, thunder and rain, hail and snow. If one studies the Almagest, a mutilation of the translation of the Arabic title Al-Majisti, the most famous Greek astronomical manual of Ptolemy, one does not find a single occurrence of comets in it. Then, at the time when cometary phenomena in the sky acquired a special significance for human beings, the tail stars were held responsible for everything that happened on the Earth. The erroneous belief prevailed, which is still noticeable today and will continue to be so in the future among mad, false astrologers, naysayers, and other crazy and delusional people, that comets were responsible for the fate of individual human beings, but also for the fate of whole peoples and the Earth itself, as well as for the climate and natural disasters and so on. In general, comets were considered, as they still are today among the insane, to be great and malevolent bringers of bad luck. Thus, the large, luminous, and threatening-looking tails of the hair stars aroused fear and terror. In a delusional manner, people who were strongly addicted to the delusion of God assumed that the comets were God's breeding rods, which were assigned to the world and human beings under the moon. It was not until the spectacular comet of 1577, which could be seen as a so-called light giant, even in full sunshine, that this delusion changed somewhat. namely through the Danish court astronomer Tycho Brahe, who provided proof that the tail stars were celestial bodies that moved their orbit far outside the Moon's orbit through the Sol system. However, the shape of the orbit was still far from being recognized, for it was not until over 100 years later that a closer determination was made by a certain Gottfried Kirsch. It was also this man who observed the destroyer, discovering it with a telescope, which was also the first time in the history of comet discovery. During this passage, the destroyer was visible for a very long time, from the 14th of November 1680 to the 19th of March 1681. It also trailed a gigantic tail 80 degrees long, which corresponds to a typical phenomenon when a comet passes very close to the surface of the Sun. This is how Ptah explained it to me on the Great Journey. Kirch did not discover the destroyer on purpose, but only by a stroke of luck when he was observing the planet Mars. Well, the SOL system comets, which are also called cosmic beacons, are subject to the SOL system mechanical laws, and they are permanent members of our solar system. This is also the case when they often move very far out into space beyond the most distant planet, Pluto, into the two belts from which they originally came or are coming. On their closed orbits, they always return to the inner solar system sooner or later, often also dangerously close to Earth, just often only after centuries, millennia, or after many millions of years. In the 19th century, when Earth humans invented astrophysical investigation methods, details of the nature of comets were also recognized and known for the first time. It became clearer and clearer that tail stars are actually only relatively small bodies which, however, undergo very dramatic changes when they come close to the Sun and through whose radiations the formation of comet tails takes place, precisely the actual characteristic or landmark of the hare stars. So comets are among the small objects of our solar system. In contrast to the planets, comets usually move in very elongated elliptical orbits with eccentricities. Thus comets, with a few sporadic exceptions, are recurring celestial objects at periodic intervals, although their orbital periods vary greatly. Long-period tail stars have an orbital period around our Sun of more than 200 years, while others, as already mentioned by you and me, take many millions of years to return, with several 100 million years not being uncommon. In contrast to this are the short-period comets, which very often come close to the Sun and Earth. Several of these short-period comets have been influenced by the masses of the Sol planets and by the mass of the Sun in such a wise that they no longer reach further than the vicinity of the orbit of the planet Jupiter, where they then turn around and begin their system-internal journey anew. In contrast to the planets themselves, which move in the so-called main plane of the solar system, comets have all conceivable orbital inclinations. And it must also be said that the tail stars are very small and low-mass celestial objects compared to planets and moons, and that their diameter ranges from a few hundred meters to only about 70 kilometers. This is normally the case if it is not a so-called giant or supergiant, which can be the size of the Earth or even larger. The actual nucleus consists of rock as well as dust and frozen water, but also of ammonia and methane, etc. Comets are only visible because of their tails, because if they did not have tails, they would not be visible in the darkness of space. When the objects come close to the Sun, approximately, depending on their size, within 4 to 12 astronomical units, the gases of the comet evaporate and form the tail, which can be thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even hundreds of millions of kilometers long, depending on the size and composition of the comet. The diameter of the tail can also be up to 100,000 kilometers or more. At first, the gas mixture and dust, etc., make the comet appear only as a blurred spot reflecting in the sunlight, but the gaseous components in the spectrum of the comet's coma also have a glow of their own. If the comet comes closer and closer to the Sun, the radiation pressure and the solar wind naturally become stronger and blow the dust and gases away from the comet, forming the coma or tail of the comet in the opposite direction to the Sun, because the particle stream hits the comet from the central star. In this way, it is also possible that,
despite the very low density of the comet, and due to its inherently luminous gaseous components and the reflection of the sunlight, it begins to shine and becomes visible to the human eye.
it is also worth mentioning that the tail components are stimulated to glow by the high-energy components of the solar radiation. This is what I learned from Ptah on my great journey.
And you still say that you have had memory problems since your collapse. Your explanations are very correct. Your memory is phenomenal. But now, dear friend, I would like to talk to you on my own behalf. My time is running out.
Go ahead then, my son. For my part, I also have no more questions for today.
Questions from the public on the contact report of the 1st of May, 1989 NB, Florina.
Question: if I look at the Arahat Athasata level, then the spirit forms that are in it should actually have slight to greater different evolutionary stages, something like those of human beings, only much more finely graded. So those spirit forms that have not been in the Arahat Athasata level for long have the lowest evolutionary levels, and those that are about to pass on to the next level have the highest?
Yes, that is correct, because evolution is a gradual development of learning and knowing and acquiring true love, knowledge, and wisdom. And this process is present in all gross material life forms, as well as in all realms of spirit forms in their pure spirit energy levels. Consequently, in every WE form, whether material or spiritual, there are lower and lowest or higher and highest levels of evolution.
Question: since the spirit forms of the Arahat Athasata level must also evolve further, as must each of the higher spirit forms in the levels thereafter, surely there must also be a source of knowledge for them, perhaps in the form of a particularly highly evolved spirit form in the Arahat Athasata level.
No, in the Arahat Athasata plane, as also in every other higher plane, the impulses in this respect come from the next higher plane, as also from the memory banks of one's own plane. With Earth humans, or as with all other human material life forms in the entire universe, the memory banks are also of the greatest importance, as is also the first pure spirit level Arahat Athasata, from which knowledge impulses are deposited in the memory banks. Depending on the development of the material life forms, in this case the human beings, they subconsciously take up this deposited information from the higher level via the memory banks, work with it and thereby gain development, hence they evolve.
Question: if I look at the spirit form of Nocademian, then according to my considerations it would have to have taken a very high evolutionary stage within the Arahat Athasata level, before it reincarnated again from the Arahat Athasata level into a material human form in the material universe, about shortly before the transition into the next level?
Yes, this is also correct. Nocademian's pure spirit form was already very highly developed in the Arahat Athasata level when the decision was made to return to a material human body, although the implementation could only be made possible through the decisive intervention of the highest level, the Pa-Tah-Li level. This was because a special change of consistency had to be created for Nocademian's spirit form, through which alone it could be made possible for the spirit form to return to a human body.
Question: so is it that the Nocademian spirit form in the realm of the material universe occupies the highest conceivable level of spiritual development and knowledge among all human life forms?
Yes, that is correct. However, this level of knowledge evolution really only relates to the concerns of spirit, creation, absolutum forms, spirit energy, spirit planes, and to the power of spirit energy, and so on. Yet this knowledge and level of evolution only reaches up to the highest level of Arahat Athasata.
Question: so this would mean that this spirit form has no source of knowledge and no memory banks closed up to the Arahat Athasata level. Consequently, then, The Nocademian spirit form is the only spirit form in the material universe that not only has the highest knowledge of the spirit, but also constantly expands and advances it at the highest level, precisely because it is able to use all sources of knowledge up to the Arahat Athasata level.
Yes, for there is the necessity that the Nocademion spirit form, in the period when it again animates a material human body, also continues to evolve in the knowledge of the Arahat Athasata level. This must be so because the spirit form, when it one day returns to its original pure spirit level, has not been deprived of any love and wisdom and knowledge on the highest level, but can continue uninhibitedly on the path of transition to the next higher and finer pure spirit level.
Question: is this the secret that the Pleiaren were trying to fathom?
Yes. That is, it was still the case in 1989 when I spoke to Quetzal in relation to the photograph I had been given. In the meantime, the Pleiaren have fathomed out the mystery and solved it.
Question: I have another question about the sons of Nocademion and Henok. They have committed themselves to spreading the mission of the knowledge of the spiritual teachings throughout the universe, and to remain faithful to this mission. I assume that the same was also true for the sons of Nocademion and Henok, and again for their sons. I also assume that this obligation has been preserved until today, and has also been passed on to all descendants living at the present time. And also in the future, I suppose everything will be transmitted in this way.
Yes, but quite a few do not live up to their destiny, and therefore do not fulfill their obligation. Included in this obligation is a long chain of Nocademians and Henok's descendants, or sons.
Question: but included in the mission since time immemorial are probably also the daughters of Nocademion and Henok, whose lineages are just as strong as those of the sons. Can you guess what their mission is?
It is very likely, or rather it is, that their task is that of every female life form, namely to bring female and male offspring into existence and thus to pass on life. However, their duty is also to protect and preserve life, love and knowledge as well as the resulting essence, wisdom, and to pass them on to their descendants so that they also can walk the right path and, through their work, carry on the knowledge and the obligation into the distant future.
Question: accordingly, I also assume that at least some core group members who have designated core group membership are distant descendants of the descendants of Nocademion and Henok.
Yes, very distant descendants, and it is not just some who belong to that lineage.
Question: I assume that the so-called punitive incarnations to which those core group members were assigned, who are destined to be in the core group, are not punitive incarnations at all, because that would not make any sense to me at all, according to the spiritual teaching. I see it rather as a case that these, when they realize that as bearers of the mission and task they have become unfaithful to their commitment, sought a way to anchor the mission and the associated task more firmly within themselves.
Yes, you can put it that way. Those faithful to their mission have perceived the decisive impulses from the memory banks, deciphered them correctly, and put them to use, consequently seeking and finding the path of the mission and now walking along it, as they have done since time immemorial. On the one hand, the mission and their use of it serves primarily their own evolution, and on the other hand, it also serves to instruct human beings themselves and to impart to them love, knowledge, and wisdom, as well as inner peace and inner freedom, balance, and harmony.
Question: so the purpose of these incarnations on Earth is not only to instruct Earth humans, but primarily to ultimately anchor in oneself the knowledge of the mission and the task associated with it so deeply that no deviation is possible in the distant future.
Quetzal would now say, that is of correctness.
Question: I assume that not only Ptah, Simyase, and Quetzal are in the Shrut evolutionary stage, but also the spirit form carrier of Nocademions and Henoks. and I further assume that he reached this stage very long before them. Is it the case that he is already one or more stages ahead of Ta, Sim Yase, and Quetzal in terms of consciousness?
The evolutionary level of Sroot begins even before the attainment of the state of Ishvish. The Sroot stand is part of the Sroot evolutionary level. Now, if Nokademion's spirit form has a very high level of evolution, this does not mean that the human being in whom this spirit form is reincarnated would therefore be anything other than a simple human being. His consciousness and the personality that emerges from it are necessarily adapted to the present human evolutionary conditions, which means that it is therefore, quite realistically, quite primitive, even if the knowledge of spiritual matters is high, which makes it possible to penetrate forward and into high memory banks. A process that is only possible with the help of the spirit energy, its power, and its knowledge and wisdom. Consciousness and the resulting personality cannot be transposed one-to-one with the spirit form. A spirit form always contains a much higher level of evolution than consciousness and its personality. Consciousness is always adapted to the circumstances of the life form, its living conditions, and its environment. This prevents consciousness-related damage from occurring through too much knowledge, etc. And if now the Nokademian spirit form, despite its high development, lives in a human being whose consciousness is more highly developed in terms of spiritual knowledge than that of fellow human beings in general, then this is also only possible through certain changing measures made possible by the Patahali level.
Question. The spirit form of Nokademian must be tremendously strong, much more powerful than any other spirit form in the material universe. Is this what has enabled the present bearer or human being carrying this spirit form, not only to catch up with the knowledge of Ta, but to surpass it to such an extent that he has been appointed the chief advisor and teacher of Pleiaren spiritual leadership? After all, he has a more comprehensive knowledge of all spiritual matters than Ptah has. And this knowledge he has acquired in a time that corresponds to a tiny fraction of Ptah's age.
But this is only based on the fact that the Nokademian spirit form bearer had and has the possibility of being able to make use of all Nokademian memory banks and Henoch memory banks, because he is the only one who has the frequency-wise possibility of penetrating these memory banks.